Good morning. I'd like to call the April 2022 WKU Staff Senate meeting to order. Thank you all for joining us. We have our agenda that has been sent out. We'll get to that in just a little bit. First, we need to do roll call. I'm going to call out roll for senators. You could respond with present. Chair Basham, present. Regent Brinkley, who I believe
present.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Campbell,
present.
Senator Cato,
present.
Senator Cole,
Present.
Senator Crow can't be with us this morning. Our secretary is on Zoom. I'm just pointing that out for her, make it a little easier. Senator England,
Present.
Senator Gilbert,
Present.
Senator Gregory,
Present.
Senator Hagan Booth,
Present.
Senator Johnson.
Present.
Sorry to make you click your mic on while you're writing down. Senator Link,
Present.
Senator Loftus, Senator Pritchard.
Present.
Thank you. And Senator Purdy, present. Senator Sequin.
Here.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Present.
Senator Vincent.
Out of town.
Oh, Tanya is out of town. Senator Waller
Present.
and Senator Wilson.
Present.
Did I miss anybody? All right. I think we're definitely have quorum, so we can proceed. The next item is approval of our proposed agenda that was sent out to the Staff Senate via email. If there is no discussion or anything, we'll ask that that's approved with unanimous consent. Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We'll move on to approval of our prior monthly minutes. We're going to do this in two steps, a little different this time. So there was a correction, an amendment that needed to be made to our already approved February minutes. So those are just to correct the position that for the search committee that Senator Gregory is serving on. That was sent out. Does anyone have any questions about that amendment? Okay, if not, I'll ask that we approve the amended version of the February 2022 minutes by unanimous consent. Hearing no objections, the amended minutes are approved as submitted. We'll move on to our March 2022 minutes. Those were also sent out in that same email. Is there any discussion about the March minutes? If not, we'll also approve those via unanimous consent if there's no objection. Those minutes are approved. And moving on to the Christopher Ware Staff Star Awards, I'd like to recognize Senator Wilson.
We have 3 Christopher Ware Staff Star recipients here today. And our first one is Ms. Barbara Jaffin. And I would like to bring up Dr. Ranjit Kudali, who's Associate Provost for Research and Graduate Education, to talk a little bit about her.
Good morning, and thank you, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Chapman is really honored to receive this award. She's a little shy, but very effective in her work. I have a few words about members to be informed. Ms. Chapman is the Admissions Associate in the graduate school. She's the longest serving graduate school staff with over 13 years of exceptional status and dedication to Western Kentucky. WKU. During these years, there have been significant changes in leadership and financial resources. Chapman has weathered these changes remarkably well and continues to serve both internal constituents of WKU and external stakeholders with accurate and timely information in keeping the interests of prospective students utmost in mind. The role of the Admissions Associate is a detail-oriented task that additionally requires verification and processing admission documents such as transcripts, candidates, test scores, etc. quickly, so that the primary processor in the graduate school can transmit the application materials to graduate program directors electronically in a timely manner. The processing of graduate admission documents transition from paper to e-signature form, and Ms. Chapman was part of the team that provided valuable feedback for the successful completion of this project during the tenure of the previous administrator. In fact, the graduate school received recognition for rolling out this transition seamlessly. The graduate school received over 3,500 applications during the fiscal year, keeping up to date with the sheer number of applications with just 2 staff members is an onerous task. To add to this complexity, unlike undergraduate admissions, many graduate programs have their own admission requirements and checklists that require extra attention to details. These demanding responsibilities require an individual with remarkable knowledge, agility, patience, especially have extreme patience, and productivity. This chaplain has provided exceptional services to WKU for over a decade. It says that fellow students such as graduate education is deeply grateful for outstanding efforts in the past graduate education. This chaplain exemplifies the spirit of WKU and, to my humble opinion, it's richly deserving of the Christopher Award.
Oh, yes, I'm very grateful. It's an honor to receive this award. Thank you both. Our next Christopher Ware Staff Star Award goes to Jessica Dorris, who works in the office of the registrar, as assistant registrar. I've got a couple of comments here from different folks in our office, and Registrar Hammond sends her regrets for not being here today, but she did write some wonderful words. She said, Jessica is a true asset to the registrar's office from day one. She has been instrumental in implementing our new degree audit system and the curriculum management software at the undergraduate level simultaneously. Behind the scenes work that takes place to implement major software systems is complex and exhausting, especially when our office did 2 systems at once. She handled both implementations with patience and persistence. She's always willing to help with any project, including commencement, which is no easy task. Jessica has great attention to detail. I can't say enough about her solid work ethic. As her supervisor, I'm honored to have her as part of our team and office. I know when she's involved in projects with our campus partners, our office is well represented. She will do her best in any situation, and not only should you congratulate her for winning this Staff Star Award, you should also wish her happy birthday. Congrats, Jessica. Thanks for all you do for me in the registrar's office. Our associate registrar, Jordan Ray, says Jessica goes above and beyond every day. She does have clearly assigned job responsibilities, which she handles with aplomb. But then if she sees something else that needs to be done, maybe something that doesn't clearly fall within someone's area of responsibility, she makes sure that it gets handled too. She is never one to say, that's not my job. Jessica is an advocate for both students and for her team members. She believes in finding joy in her work and in helping others to find the same sense of fulfillment. Jessica is the definition of a Staff Star member and embodies the standards this award is designated to recognize. And finally, another colleague wrote, Jessica is a great coworker. She's always willing to help. She is patient to answer your questions. She works hard for the betterment of the office, and she is always eager to tackle new challenges. And Jessica does all this with a great attitude each and every day. On behalf of the Staff Senate, we would like to thank you for all you do, and we've got and you are welcome to bring your team up here or come along. She's got a little cheering squad. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
And our third Staff Star Award recipient is Ms. Monica Ball. I would love to have Kirsten from HRL and Evelyn Brasher, assistant
Kirsten Hooks, as she shared, and I have had the honor to work with Monica in terms of our living learning communities this year. I wrote a little bit down so I don't get all messed up, but so I actually have the pleasure of knowing Miss Monica Duval since I was a sophomore in my undergraduate program. She actually came to one of my classes when I was in the Gordon College of Business and spoke on internships. And little did she know, at that point, she immediately became someone I would look up to as someone that was completely energetic, excited, and very optimistic about her position. Flash forward to my junior year, Monica helped me land my first paid internship because Monica is a big believer that every internship should be paid. And completely helped me shift my goals in terms of where I was going in my degree and future and career afterwards as well. I've now had the honor of working with Monica for 2 years in the professional setting, and I definitely look up to her as a colleague. Monica is incredibly grounded and efficient in everything that she does. She is always looking for ways to help out and give back to students. She puts 110% into everything she does and always makes an effort to help out where she can. I look up to her as a beacon of knowledge and charisma, and I'm incredibly proud to know her. And I know our campus is better because she's on it. So thank you all for helping me celebrate Monica today at this time.
Let Dr. Brasher comments. Some of my comments are far less prepared. I only needed her. I had the privilege actually of being on the search committee when we hired her. So we were hiring an internship coordinator, and I remember that she was the only candidate who showed up with notes. And she came with notes, so she was doing the job before she did time. And she was so ready, and she was such an advocate for the students from day one. And we handed her a very vague job description and said, help us create this internship coordinator position. And thank heavens that she took it and ran with it because it far exceeded anything we could have ever developed. So it only made sense when we formed our student success team that Monica should be selected to lead that team because she is everything that a student could possibly ask for in a mentor and a professional and a role model. And so most recently, she's been very, very involved in our LLC and helping us start that in our college and helping make it successful. And it's bursting at the seams already. And she just continues to say, bring it on, we'll figure it out. And so, yeah, on behalf of our college, our faculty and staff, and especially our students, every student should have a Monica Duval in their life. And so I just am honored to call her my colleague in my group.
We'll move on to the next item. I'll recognize our special guests, Andrea Sherrill from WKU HR, Mindy Hutchins from WKU HR, EVP Susan Howarth, and Katie Manning from Siegel. I'm going to mute our room so everybody can hear. That is joining us virtually, and then just make sure we don't have feedback. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Jordan, and thank you all. Good morning. It's nice to be able to get in front of you all again and allowing us the time and opportunity to present really where we are today with the compensation study. We know this has felt like a very long process, and in many ways it has been for everyone, for us, for you all, and we recognize that. However, we are happy to be at a point where others can finally see the fruits of our labor and be able to share elements of the program that are finally starting to come to fruition. So again, joining us this morning from WKU side is Executive Vice President Susan Howarth, and Mindy Hutchins, compensation analyst. I'm sure you all are familiar with them. And then from Siegel, vice president and senior consultant, Katie Manning. And then I'll hand this over in just a bit to her. Again, because some of us are in different locations, having Zoom as our main platform makes our presentation flow a little bit easier as well. So thanks for bearing with us, because we all have some parts in this today. So, all right, so what are we talking about today? And, why are we here? What are our objectives? We really want to ensure that everyone has a good, solid understanding of the hows and the whys of where we are and how we got to where we are today. For some of you that have been involved in some of these presentations along the way, including stakeholder groups, committees, some of this will be a review. The last time we did a full presentation has been was last semester. So we just thought a refresher was really good, because having that comprehensive understanding of how the elements that we did even at the early onset of the study, which has been a little while, having that understanding of the interconnectivity of all of those pieces will help you understand how we got to where we are today, and sharing with you some of the findings that we'll share with you as well. But we also will discuss the first phase of implementation, which really also involves the utilization of the 0.5% of the funds set aside from the 1/1/22 increase that was across the board, if you recall that. So when we refer to phase one, that's really how are we using those reserved funds? What does that look like? What did our strategy entail? And we'll be talking specifically about those things today. Obviously, when we refer to phase one, it insinuates that there's additional phases. And although we will talk about next steps in this presentation, additional phases of the plan are really still being worked through and determined. Those things include things like our pay administration guidelines, which is foundational to understanding how our compensation program works, how compensation decisions are made. That is coming, and that's in the final phases as well. We're also talking about, institutional strategy moving forward. How are we going to utilize future salary pools that may be available? How will those be distributed? What are strategies, discussions, and what does that look like? And then, of course, training for those involved in hiring decisions. That's one thing that we also have wanted to do, and using the pay admin guidelines, helping people understand those things, and helping hiring managers and those involved in the hiring process, be trained on those things, and how to make decisions, and how to move people through bands, and those types of things. Those are all next steps to come. This is not a done project, and honestly, in order to maintain such a program, it's never fully done. Although when we talk about implementation, that does look like a finite thing, even though that's not that can be done over the course of several years. And again, we'll talk about some of those things in this presentation. As far as questions go, we did receive initial questions that were pre-submitted via the survey, and we'll speak to those, whether they're addressed throughout the presentation or specifically at the end. We were able to identify some themes, but we have captured those questions at the end, and we'll talk to those. We will continue to capture questions that are submitted through the survey and work to address those, and we'll respond to those and post those on our website within the next week. So because I know that survey link is still open, accepting questions. So we will do that on our website, in addition to putting up some additional resources available for everybody related to this presentation as well. Okay, all right. Well, here we go. Katie, I will hand it over to you from this point forward, and you can hand it back to me when we're ready.
Great, thank you. Happy to be here today to speak with everyone and give you some of the results of the study and how we got to where we are today. Andrea covered the majority of this slide as far as objectives and where we're going, and we'll get into more details about these as we move through. What I wanted to do first is talk through the study overall and the timeline that we had. And we know, as Andrea mentioned, it's taken a lot of time and effort to get to where we are today. And we wanted to discuss what's been happening behind the scenes, where some of our pauses have been based on our good friend COVID. We can blame a little bit of pause in there on that, but we wanted to talk through some of the phases and just give a better understanding of what's involved in a study of this nature. They are very comprehensive. They do take time to ensure that we're conducting the analysis appropriately and gathering feedback as we go through. So there is an allotment for that throughout each phase. This is high level, a lot of interim steps that happen in here in every phases, but I'll just work my way through this timeline pretty high level and let you know what the different phases were and the estimated timing for each of those and where we were. The first phase, project kickoff and data collection. That's a time in the project that we take a step of just seeking to understand. Conducting stakeholder discussions, we had those on campus at that time frame, cross sections of staff and faculty, to gauge perceptions and thoughts and pain points on the compensation programs overall. While leadership and HR may have their perspective on what some of those issues might be, we want to hear from individuals that are impacted daily by that, as well as being employees, as well as maybe being supervisors or managers and having to explain information to their teams. And so that is a critical component of what we do. In that phase as well, we also take the time to review all of the data that WKU team provides us, whether that's census data, policy data, program data. There was a job description process that was in here as well. And so that is a significant investment of time. You can see there we spent about 4 or 5 months on that in total. But at the same time, we were also working towards compensation philosophy development. And that next phase is really focused on taking all the information that we've gathered from our stakeholder groups, understanding what we know about the higher education industry in totality, WKU specifically, and developing a strategic document to help guide the development and the maintenance and management of compensation programs over the longer term. So that is a document that's foundational in nature, and then we build on that as we move through. A major component of that is identifying peer groups and relative comparison markets. So from that standpoint, we'll talk about this in more detail as well, is who should we be comparing ourselves to from a compensation standpoint? What do those groups look like? For faculty, it's a focus heavily on higher education. For staff, it's a focus on higher education and some general industry data. So we need to blend those given the comparison markets and the talent markets for which we compete for talent. Those two run fairly simultaneously there. There are pieces that get done earlier, pieces that get done later in that process, but that's really the first several months of any study, is really taking the time to understand what our roadmap looks like throughout. Once we have those areas developed, particularly the peer groups, the comparison markets, our approach to the benchmarking, we move into that faculty and staff market assessment that you see there. And again, that's another significant amount of time, about 6 months all in on that, to conduct the study very specifically. So we do involve academic affairs in that. We involve human resources in that analysis as well. There's a draft portion. There's some validation with leaders that you'll see as well in future phases. But during that point, we are gathering the market data from the surveys to do the comparison. What do WKU salaries look like in comparison to those market peers that we've identified? We calculate any sort of variance analysis, whether that's gaps below, or if we have areas where we're more competitive to market, identifying those. No recommendations, as you saw on the prior page, to cut salaries or anything in concert with that. More of an awareness to say, here are some areas where maybe we're a little bit more competitive to market, in areas where we may have some gaps to market that we need to work to correct. And so that is a major component of that portion of the study. When we got to February of 2020, as we all know, we finished that up, moved into March 2020, and the world kind of got put on hold for a lot of these types of projects. Many institutions were in a similar position of putting projects like this on hold due to the pandemic, uncertainty of what would come out of that, or the impact on faculty and staff from that perspective. And so this is a case where we did that as well. And we really put that on pause until June of 2021. When we regrouped with the team and said, we're ready to move forward, let's talk about implementation in those phase 1 activities. So based on that, starting in July of last year, and you can see here, this is another significant period of time because of the intensive review that we engage leaders in, both deans and division leaders from that standpoint. We developed the salary structures, relevant ranges for both faculty and staff, and I will address both studies here, staff in a little more detail, but just for context and understanding what happened across the university. We assigned jobs to the structures, the ranges, we validated with leaders. There are very specific incumbent pieces. So in the market assessment, we focus very heavily on jobs. What are the jobs? Salary structure, same thing. Then we have to get down to an individual incumbent level. While there may be incumbents that are all the same job, there may be differences in their market placement or some of their gaps. And we have to determine how we're going to address those, what those cost implications may be. Part of those are contingent on that pay administration guideline document that Andrea mentioned as well. That is a very comprehensive, detailed document on how we manage our compensation programs and administer them day to day. So our comp philosophy was foundational. Our pay administration guidelines is tactical and helping us think about how we maintain that on an ongoing basis. Once we got through that phase, we were able to move into preparing and sharing some of the findings, which is what we're doing through these series of meetings that we have, developing more detailed implementation and communications plans, finalizing those pay administration guidelines. And while we say finalizing, those are a living, breathing document. And so there may be changes that have to be made on a go-forward basis, but they're more tweaks and trying to align with, once you live with it a little bit, there may be a few things that need to be tweaked from a process perspective. Rolling out any other program materials, FAQs that were referenced as well, individual employee letters for communications, those types of things. So those are all occurring here in this March and then now into April timeframe as well. So a lot of steps here that involve not just the Siegel team, but also many, many people at WKU to make sure that we're gathering the right kind of information and that we're addressing needs that may be out there and trying to align as best we can with market as well. As far as comparison markets, I referenced this on the prior page. You can see here, this table is sort of a summary of how we go about the study itself. And we have positions unique to higher education, and we have those that are found outside of higher education. Typically, when we're talking direct reports to the president, deans, faculty, those are primarily higher education-based roles. That's where we're going to focus our study. And so those specific positions really had the higher education comparator group as their primary data point. When we move into some of the staff roles, we are taking into consideration some of the general industry, perhaps nonprofit for some, other higher education employers that may be included too. And we supplement the data with some general industry data as well. From a directors and above, roughly, that standpoint, we're really talking national labor market. We're competing on a national basis, we're recruiting on a national basis, a little bit more. When we move into exempt staff, which are managers, professional, individual contributors, some of our non-exempt staff, we need to take into consideration more of a regional view because that's how salaries are generally viewed. That's where our recruitment activity is primarily happening. And so we assess the cost of labor differential, which is what does it cost us to attract and retain talent? And there was a differential applied from a regional labor market perspective downward from a national level and what we see from that perspective. So a differential of about 10% across the board there. As far as the higher education comparison group specifically, this is a very comprehensive process that we undertake as well to identify institutions that are most similar to WKU from factors that would typically drive compensation levels. So in a peer group situation in higher education, we know that there are many comparator groups that are used across a university, whether it's program benchmarking, specific performance metrics that may be involved. There's overlap in those groups, definitely overlap from that perspective, but they're not necessarily one-to-one from a relationship of that. So we began this group looking at institutions that were similar from being a public institution, master's and doctoral institutions, and we did have a regional focus. We've identified the regional here that we looked at. Some are more specifically Southeast, some are states that border on Kentucky to ensure that when we've got a regional viewpoint, we're taking all of that into consideration. Using those factors, we started out with a group of about 134. We selected institutions that met the criteria, total expenses and total student FTE from that perspective. And this was done a while ago, so these figures have changed. But from an apples to apples comparison, the peers have as well. But this is where we were when we developed the initial peer group. And using a range around WKU's criteria specifically, we ended up with institutions that met both of the criteria, which yielded us 46 institutions. We then did include Kentucky public institutions that didn't meet both criteria because they are a relevant labor market from that standpoint, and we wanted their data points reflected in the peer group as well. So we ended up with 50 institutions that have participated in at least one Coupa HR survey through that process. We typically target 30 or more institutions to ensure that we've got robust enough sample sizes for rare disciplines in the faculty space and for very unique staff positions as well. As far as overall market assessment methodology, as I mentioned, this is going to touch on faculty and staff. So we have a combined methodology here just for transparency and reference. Survey sources, higher education, our primary survey source is the Coupa HR suite of surveys. They have a faculty survey and they have 3 different surveys that touch on staff positions. So we utilize those. General industry is a suite of surveys from other prominent survey firms. Comp Analyst, Pay Factors, and Willis Towers Watson were used across the staff population from that perspective as well. And that gives us reference points for staff positions that are commonly found in general industry as well to incorporate into the study. Comparison markets we covered on the prior slide. As far as how we match positions to that market data, from a faculty perspective, that's done based on rank and discipline. That's how the information is reported to the surveys, and that's how it's reported from the surveys. From a staff perspective, it is very heavily focused on the content of the job and not the title. So we have the job descriptions that were provided from WKU and were provided from a staff perspective, and the surveys have summary descriptions as well, so that we can accurately match jobs and ensure that we're comparing similar jobs in the marketplace. From a staff perspective, a match is considered appropriate if approximately 70% of the job content and requirements align. That's a general rule of thumb across the industry from a job content standpoint and matching successfully staffed positions. We do have cases where we may have to adjust matches, where that 70% doesn't quite work, or there are some adjustments that we need to make to ensure that we're really comparing similar jobs there. We use this on a sparing basis, so they're certainly not, with a 70% benchmark, we have enough flexibility in there, but there are premiums or discounts applied to certain matches, maybe based on supervisory responsibilities. Sometimes the surveys don't have the same number of job levels that an institution may have, and we need to make some adjustments. Those are typically how we would apply those throughout the survey data. Other adjustments are aging the market data, and each survey has an effective date when data is submitted by the participating institutions or organizations in the case of general industry, and they have a published date. And then we also have a market data age date that we are looking to ensure that the data is as fresh as we can get it for use in salary structure design or other market-based activities. In this case, we aged to January 2022, brought all those surveys to a common point in time, and we used an aging factor of 2.8%. That is based on the trend in higher education, specifically for salary increase budgets. That number in the past several years has ranged anywhere from 2.5% to 3%, usually 2.8, 2.9. We are seeing a little bit of varied activity in that realm right now, just given some of the impacts of COVID in other areas, some significant below that, some maybe above that, but that's generally where the trend is from a salary budget standpoint. As I mentioned, we did have validation of market matches. So we do our match selection, we do our market adjustments perhaps to those. And then we did have a validation process with the HR project team, with deans, with supervisors to ensure that we were accurately reflecting jobs in our analysis. As far as market data, wanting to set some context here on how we use that market data. While it is a heavy focus of our study, it's not the only focus of the study. There's an entire toolkit that we use in determining compensation levels and the appropriateness of those. Market data is a key component, helps us drive the salary structure and ensure that we're staying market competitive. But then we also use those pay administration guidelines as well as part of the toolkit, and the knowledge of deans, division leaders, supervisors, and some of the retention or recruitment risks that they may be seeing that need to be addressed. But market data primarily, the box in the middle is what I'd really like to focus on, what it tells us and what it doesn't. From a market data standpoint, it is a range for the value of the job that's identified in the market. Not a precise number from that standpoint, but definitely indicates a range of value for the job in the market, given supply and demand right now, given market conditions that we're seeing. It's not necessarily, as I mentioned, a precise number. So sometimes there may be market conditions that are happening for certain functions or certain roles that are not captured in the survey market data. And that's where the salary structure and pay administration guidelines can help us navigate. It does represent the cost of hire for an employee from the market for which the organization recruits talent. The range around that gives us some flexibility to account for individual incumbent differences that we may need to account for, gives us trends in compensation year over year. So we're able to see, are there functions, are there roles for which the market is moving quickly or moving a little more slowly, depending on what those are. And we can start to anticipate what that may look like in future years based on other market analytics that we may have available. Market data is not a cost of living within a market, doesn't represent those costs of living. It really very much represents the cost of labor and the cost of salaries in an individual market. And it doesn't necessarily represent the appropriate pay rate for every individual in a job. That's where the pay guidelines come into effect as well. Once we price the jobs, we then look at individuals, their skills, their knowledge, their experience, and their performance to some nature to figure out where they should be placed against those market rates and within a salary structure. As far as some preliminary staff assessment results, we've got two components of the slide. I'll focus first on the left-hand portion, which is the market component of the study. You can see here there's percent of the total WKU incumbents, that means individual staff members. We were able to benchmark 60% of the total population. And I want to set context behind that number as well. Our goal is to benchmark positions in the 60 to 70% of those incumbents in any given study. Doesn't matter what institution we're going for. That's generally what we're able to do based on the uniqueness for some of the staff positions in the market and availability of data. That does not mean that the other 40% are not included in the study. It just means that we don't have market data for those positions specifically, but they are included in the salary structure component of the study and any pay administration guidelines and implementation plans. As far as the aggregate competitiveness to market, this is for the benchmarked positions, the sum of the salaries that WKU is paying and the sum of the salaries that the market is paying for those same positions. And we generally like to see this competitiveness somewhere 85 to 115, 80 to 120. So we are on the lower end of that competitive range in aggregate, but that is an aggregate number. So within there are individuals that have larger gaps than that to market and their position may be lower than 84%. And then on the flip side, there's also individuals that are going to be higher than that 84%. That does not mean that individuals are placed appropriately necessarily at that aggregate level, but that is something that we do further on into the study and assess individuals and their placement. The right-hand side of the slide is the salary structure. So we take the market data that we have, we build the salary structure to be market aligned and but give us flexibility in ranges and how we group jobs individually within there. And so then what we do is assess how many individuals do we have that are within the range. You can see here we've got about 80% that are within the range of the new band, and I'll speak to that in more detail in a minute. We've got about 13% that are below the minimum of a new band. Our goal there is that that's as close to zero as possible. There are some exceptions that may exist in there from that standpoint, but that should be a very low number that are below the minimum of a band. And that is something that we're addressing for phase 1 of implementation. We also have a group here, about 8% that are above the maximum of their new band. That's an informational number. As I mentioned, we're not recommending any decreases in salary to account for that. Something to keep an eye on. It's a little bit higher than we normally see, about 3 to 5% is what we would typically see above maximum, but nothing concerning from that nature, and just something to be aware of as moving through the pay guidelines go. Now, as far as these groupings that we have here, if you recall on the prior slide I mentioned, that doesn't necessarily mean that people who are within this band or within the range of their new band are placed appropriately within that band. And that is something to address in future phases of implementation, but it's something that it takes a lot of research and assessment and analysis internally to make sure that we're reviewing individuals appropriately, understand their skills and experience, their time and position, where should they be within that range. But it does let us know that generally we're within the right ranges, but we do likely have some tweaking that needs to happen in there. This is our focus area for phase one, and considering bringing everybody up to the minimum of their new bands so that then we can more accurately assess everybody's placement within those bands and determine what other adjustments may need to be made. Let's talk salary structure design. I mentioned we use our market data to develop a salary structure. We have developed salary structures for both faculty and staff, so there is a structure that exists for faculty as well. The same considerations go into determining the final salary structure design regardless of group, faculty or staff from that perspective. The primary purpose of a salary structure and being effective is that it serves as an effective tool for managing pay in concert with those pay guidelines, in concert with the ranges that we have from a market perspective. It should serve as a tool for managing compensation overall. Moving clockwise through here, it should also be aligned with market. That's why we use the market data to build that salary structure. It should allow us in the grouping of positions, some internal equity within same positions and within similar positions that might be in different functions. Gives us flexibility to adjust pay for some of those individual considerations and some market considerations as well when we say we need a little more flexibility when we're recruiting or when we're hiring from that standpoint. As we move into these teal and green areas, it's really more focused on simplification, streamlining, being able to be transparent about how pay decisions are made and using the salary structures to allow us to do that. Increasing the overall understanding of compensation across the university. When we had our stakeholder sessions at the beginning of the study, we heard loud and clear that transparency is a concern, consistent and equitable processes are a concern, and just understanding compensation overall. And that's a goal of not just the salary structure, but all of the programs that have been designed throughout the study and will continue to be through implementation. So implementation, we talk a lot about the financial components, but there are many, many non-financial components that are extremely impactful and something that will be emphasized going forward as well. From a staff salary structure design perspective, still some finalization happening here. We use those considerations, we use the market data, we learned what we needed to from the focus groups to then say, how do we bring this all together in designing a salary structure? So as we mentioned, the key first and foremost is market alignment. So we did align to that regional custom peer group market data along with, for staff, the general industry data as well factored into those composite numbers. We ended up with 14 pay grades to cover all of the staff positions at WKU. In a salary structure, there are many designs as far as staff salary structures and what those may look like. The method that fit your positions best and aligned with the higher education industry overall is something that we call more of a hybrid structure. It takes the market, but then there's also some construct of symmetry as we move through the study. And typically what we see in these types of structures is more of a funnel. And we've got narrower bands at the bottom and we have larger bands at the top. And there are reasons for that along the lines of in some of the jobs in the lower bands, we see more rapid promotion. We don't need as much room to move because individuals are progressing up through the structure. We also see less variability in the market data because the skills and experience required are much more aligned in some of the positions that are in the lower bands versus some of those that might be in the higher bands. So as we move through jobs in a structure, we see a couple of things happening. We see wider variability in the skills and experience required for some of those jobs within different institutions or different general industry, causing a wider range of market data. We also see individuals that are staying in their positions longer, just based on the types of roles that they're in, that they increase in strategy, they increase in expectations, and there's usually a longer learning curve and a longer lifespan in those positions. So we need more room to move and more flexibility to accommodate the pay differentials that come along with that. We do have one structure for all jobs, exempt and non-exempt are contained in one structure. There are some bands where there may be some overlap, but for the most part, they progress with the structure. And we also have a consistent distribution of jobs. So something we look for when we're developing salary structures is, do we have clusters of jobs? Do we have positions where we have 3 or 4 jobs and then suddenly we have 20 in another band adjacent to that? Do we need to adjust those, or is there something off of the market alignment? The structure worked out pretty well to have fairly consistent distribution of jobs throughout the structure. So this structure as well, I will say from a pay administration guidelines perspective, is something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis to ensure that we're keeping alignment with market, that we're making any adjustments that need to be made. It's not something that you set up and then you leave it for 10 years. It's something that on a more consistent basis, usually somewhere around every 5 years or so, you may be making more major adjustments to these structures, but you might be making some tweaks throughout just based on market conditions. Pay administration guidelines. Andrea touched on this, as have I, a few times already leading up to this point. We want to dig a little bit deeper into what those are specifically. So compensation philosophy's ultimate goal was to provide competitive, fair, equitable compensation, transparent, consistent. All of those words that you've heard us use were what we've heard from stakeholders and what we know are the components of a strong compensation program overall. Our pay administration guideline is in direct support of those objectives. And in doing so, you can see here, there's some categories here about career growth, the actual compensation administration, and the maintenance of the compensation program specifically. We've talked about some of the other items, common actions that we have, reclassification, promotions, transfers, those types of things. As far as how we set hiring rates, how we go about reviewing equity and market increases, some of the structure range details. What I really want to focus on is that maintaining the compensation program. As you saw at the beginning of the presentation, the timeline and the amount of activity that has gone into developing these programs and the hyper focus on market and ensuring that we're staying in alignment with market, that we are being equitable, we're being fair, we're being consistent in how we're administering these programs. That takes a maintenance process to keep moving and to keep ensuring that we are evaluating and being fair and consistent over time. And so through that, there are components of the pay administration guidelines, whether that's reviewing annually what salary structure movement might be in the market, whether that is benchmarking a portion of jobs on an annual basis to ensure that any high movement jobs are being recognized. Where are we seeing recruitment and retention concerns? How are we responding to those? And a key component that you see on here are staff job descriptions. Having an ongoing method for maintaining the accuracy and current nature of job descriptions. So oftentimes job descriptions are written when we're filling jobs or moving jobs or a larger effort that we saw a couple of years ago, and they're just sort of left behind until the next big study. And really incorporating that into the annual processes, whether it's performance reviews or development discussions, is really a key way to ensure that we're keeping our job descriptions current and accurate. As far as implementation, we've touched on this a little bit. Generally speaking, most of these implementations across universities, that can be private, public, different sizes, different regions of the country, they generally cannot afford to make salary adjustments all at one time when studies of this nature are conducted. This is the issues that we find are not issues that happened overnight, and they're not going to be fixed overnight. And so we need to take a thoughtful, methodical approach on how we do that. So it is very common for program implementation to span 3 to 5 years. There are a mix of components in there, financial and non-financial, from an implementation standpoint. Some of the considerations on a more annual basis that need to be reviewed. Do we need to evaluate our market pay positioning? What are our available financial resources from that standpoint? What's the change tolerance for the institution given other major initiatives that may be happening? That was a consideration for a lot of institutions with the impact of COVID recently, is how much more can people take? Can we really ask them to invest a lot of time in some of these areas, knowing that they've got some other issues they're still dealing with as a result of the pandemic? Those are considerations that are taken into play in most of these studies. But these will change on an annual basis. Some may be more impactful in certain years and some may be less impactful in certain years. But having a high level plan of what that looks like, and as Andrea mentioned, got some ideas on that, but there's certainly details that need to be worked out. But that is something that is an ongoing commitment as far as how do we implement and what does that look like from financial and non-financial perspective. The general rollout guidelines here for phase 1 are employees currently below their grade minimum are a priority, and that's a commitment that's been made, and that applies to both faculty and staff from that perspective. Future phases will take into more consideration individual employees and how do we move them closer to those target positions within their salary ranges. We mentioned earlier that we have a general idea of who's below, who's within, who's above, but within there's movement. There's individuals that need to be adjusted based on their individual positions, market rates for their jobs, their individual qualifications, skills, experience, those types of things. That is, of course, determined based on how much funding allows or what other priorities might be there as well. But those are generally how the implementation pieces are being considered. And Andrea, I'll ask if you have anything you'd like to add to that from an implementation standpoint.
At this point.
Okay. Great. As far as what's next, so time frame and where we are, we have been doing some of these meetings, as you probably know. We had a faculty advisory committee. We have had standing advisory committees as part of this study. We've also met with Faculty Senate to do a similar presentation to this. We have a staff advisory committee that we have also met with throughout the study, and they have seen a presentation similar to this, and now we're meeting with you. So we've been working through these communications based on the right timeframes available for those meetings. In March, I mentioned we've been doing a lot of work here in March and April. March, the deans and divisional leaders were receiving some of their detailed spreadsheets for them to review what phase 1 adjustments may look like. A lot of work in that process there as well. Still finalizing some of those details here in April, and notifications will be going out to impacted employees here in the April timeframe. Start to see those changes in paychecks and some of those conversations in the April-May timeframe there as well. But everything from a faculty and staff perspective, salary change-wise, is retroactive to 1/1/2022. And the same date that the across the board increases were put into place as well. And as we mentioned, this is a multi-year process, so more information will be provided on those future phases as the analysis and final plans are finalized there as well. So that's the formal presentation portion from my perspective and the Siegel perspective on the project itself. But I do want to turn it over to Andrea and Mindy, who will address some of the questions that were submitted prior to the meeting that we have here today.
We have, okay, yeah, so there, we did review your questions that came in so far. We did notice, I feel like there's some feedback from me. It's just me. But we did review, we noticed some themes, which we've outlined here on this slide for you. And we grouped them together. I do get feedback from some.
Yeah, there's feedback.
Okay. All right. Seeing if it's on my end, I can fix it, but I don't think it is. Okay. All right. But we will be providing more thoughtful responses to some of these. We are going to address, and we've grouped them together. We are going to address some of the themes, but we are also going to follow up with some of them are more individualistic in nature. And so we want to make sure that we're not applying kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to some of these too. So we'll take a look at those and make sure that we are giving thoughtful responses to and understanding where the questions and concerns might be coming from as well. And we will have those on our website as well within the next week. And also one quick thing, you know, we are planning to notify as far as the communication plan goes next week. People will be, we will be communicating with people, you know, where their new bands are and what that means for them going forward too, as far as the overall timeline goes. So we're trying to make sure our website is updated to match that notification. So we'll have resources and FAQs and those things, because we know that that will exist. So we do plan to have those things updated on our website by the time that individuals receive notification. Okay. So, all right, from there, do we have a list of, is this just, are we just kind of going through our list of of questions. Naturally, the first thing, cost of living. We received a lot of questions about cost of living, and especially with what we're seeing with inflation. And it isn't ignored in our data. However, when we talk about the interplay of cost of living when designing compensation programs, there's really two geographic pay differentials that we consider. And cost of living is one of them, but also cost of labor, which Katie mentioned earlier. And that is a primary factor in determining pay differences among locations, WKU included. Cost of labor is really reflective of the supply and demand of talent and for given roles. And that is incorporated for long-term planning and strategy when you're building compensation programs. Cost of living adjustments are certainly a strategy. It's certainly an option on the table as we move forward and we talk about, how do we use money that has been set aside or what funding is available. Maybe cost of living adjustments are something we want to consider, but those are still things and decisions and discussions that still have to be made. And it's important too that when there's annual, adjustments, that's not only cost of living. There's a lot of other factors involved in that, and some of that involves strategy, but it could be, what's available funding, what's our budget, are there internal equity adjustments? We know that wages don't always keep up with cost of living, or rarely ever. They never keep up with cost of living, but that is certainly an option on the table as we move forward and talk about, what is our strategy? How do we utilize the money that we might have? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. So, but we absolutely expect to see a lot of cost of living questions. As far as strategy goes, we had a lot of questions about, why isn't everyone getting an increase? And again, kind of going back to the original objective, why, what are we trying to do? We really had to understand what the problem was and then talk about, well, how do we fix the problems? Now that we know where the problems are and maybe where they are not, how do we talk about fixing those going forward? And again, this is the first wave of adjustments. We talked about what our strategy was and what that looked like, and bringing those that are furthest from market up to the minimum of their band. We fully expect to see additional adjustments in the future using the parameters of the new compensation data. And there is a stated commitment from President Caboni and the leadership team, on focusing on compensation adjustments and making those necessary changes as funding allows moving forward. So again, we fully expect to see additional adjustments from here. Another question was specific to, the cutoff for those that were included in I think it was an August 1st hire date. They weren't necessarily reflected. Our latest census data that we did pull our data from was in August. We always know that there will always be new hires that we are working into the model. There's a manage for addressing new hires as they come into the model. And so it's not that they will never be included. If they came in after the fact, there's ongoing reviews and things that we will do. Once they're in our system, then they're slotted, everybody will be reflected in our model. They'll be included going forward as we talk about how how we make adjustments to the model and the people and our employees that are within the model as well. Speaking of new hires, another thing that had come up too was related to, when we do these studies, the models typically benefit new hires and not the people that have been here for any length of time. And so that's when we get into conversations about compression, inverted salaries, those kinds of things. And that is certainly a risk when you implement a program, but those are strategies that we really need to be aware of and talk about. And there is, again, commitment to address some of those compression issues going forward, and not just bringing new people in and paying them at market. There's other things that have to be done to address everyone else that's already here. And we know that, we recognize that. This helps us see that from a different lens and really a more accurate lens now about where people should be and where they are not, and then making a plan to address that. So we want to see that this is a model for all and not just a few. All right. Regarding classifications was a big one. I'll let Mindy kind of take that and talk about a lot of the reclassification questions that came in.
Sure.
one of the themes of several of the questions that we received was around reclassifications, particularly as jobs have changed, post reduction in force, and then through COVID, and then post VSIP. And we recognize that jobs have changed, particularly since 2019, when the job analysis questionnaires were completed. However, some of the things that we need to think through as we look at reclassifications is, one, are these changes temporary? Many on campus have taken on different duties or tasks, then they may be more of a temporary standpoint that come over the next year may adjust. However, if they're not, and they do seem to be more of a permanent change, we need to look at things like, have those tasks shift? Maybe something that was a priority of that job is now a different priority. What we do know is that as a university, we couldn't stop the movement of jobs while this study was happening. And so we knew going into it that we were going to have to address changes, new hires, and those may be a bit more escalated because of what has happened over the last couple of years, but we do know that those have to be addressed. As Andrea mentioned, August was when our last census was pulled for this data. At some point, we have to decide a finite time to go forward. So we do recognize in the coming phases, we will have to address jobs that have changed, not only from the reduction in force and VSIP, but also from any kind of reclassifications that have happened since August. But one thing I can tell you is that modifications to jobs and reclassifications haven't stopped. And so specifically for those asking those questions, if your position has changed, from say a 60% standpoint or so, and that looks to be an ongoing change, then we would encourage you to continue to use the reclassification and modification process and interview exchange. That's not a new process, and that's not something that will change because of this. And so if those job changes have happened, that's still the process to use. However, we do know that we are also going to have to take a look back, even just from August, for the more specific changes that have happened recently. And if there's questions as we go for as far as interview exchange and modifications to jobs, certainly that's something that HR can continue to partner with you on. Were there any other questions we wanted to address, Andrea, on the list, or?
Well, and the last one is another, which was, again, where I mentioned earlier, a lot of very individual scenarios, I think, that people had questions about, and we will, again, take those and respond to those and try to get to the root cause of the concern. And again, we will post those on our website. But some of the themes within the other category, there were some questions, why do we continue doing compensation studies? At least as far as I'm aware, the last one that WKU did was in 1996. So, over 20 years ago. And then why do we keep using outside, companies to do the salary studies? And, again, this is really the second time in 20 plus years that we've engaged a consulting company for a full comprehensive compensation initiative. There are many, many things on the WKU side that we need to do in order to maintain our program and to keep that updated and to keep that sustainable. It includes a lot of work from HR, but it also includes support and resources from our leadership team as well. And doing those things so that we don't find ourselves in really the situation maybe that we've seen in the last 10 years or so as well. So there's a lot of maintenance involved that has to happen on our end as well. And so that's a commitment that we would like to make, and we would like to see leadership support and move forward on. But again, this is really the second time in 20 years we've done a comprehensive compensation study. So it was definitely time to do that. And this is not a one and done deal. We have now a really good map where we need to go, and it kind of gives us the infrastructure for an entire program with a lot of different pieces to it, which again, we touched on throughout this presentation as well. Another question, or a couple of questions, touched on, when WKU will start offering higher compensation for higher level of degrees. And again, the volume in which we've seen that question, it really starts with considering the requirements of the job. And I know that when we even go back to talking about training from a best practices and hiring standpoint, we're really encouraging people to look at those job descriptions. Don't grandfather something in, and really consider what is being asked of the educational requirements. We do tend to see inflated degrees that are required, and sometimes does that skew the understanding of what's happening on the compensation conversation. I don't know. Sometimes not, but that is where partnering with HR on the front end of, when you're trying to determine what is actually needed from an experience and education standpoint for jobs, can be really beneficial. So we don't have the confusion on the back end. Another question, which I'd love to see, what else, what other benefits can we provide, maybe in addition to, compensation changes, or, what are some other things that we can do? I think remote work was even mentioned, and, we love to talk about what that looks like. As we move forward, we're going to have to think about what else, in addition to compensation, that we can consider to make our total rewards attractive. There's a lot of work to do in that regard. We're kind of in a new age right now when it comes to what attracts talent to WKU. What is that employee value proposition? What do people find beneficial and rewarding and valuable? Compensation is absolutely important. It is our primary means of, paying, rewarding our employees, but what else is there? What else could we do to add to the mix? So those will absolutely, and we're talking about those things now. But we will continue to not hopefully just talk about them, and we will be able to, add things to that mix that make working at WK rewarding and valuable to the individual. So those are also discussions being had now and will continue to be had. I think that was really it. I had just kind of a quick list of different things, and I think I've touched on them. I think that's all that I have right now. I see a question in the chat from Jordan. Pay bands when the question about pay bands announced, is that next week? Yes. So people will be notified of their new placement, of what their band is and what that looks like. So they'll have data related to that range and to that band. And yes, we are working on that communication as we speak to hit our target of getting those out to individual emails next week. So everybody will be notified at that point.
Okay, I think that wraps up what I've seen from Qualtrics and our pre-submitted questions. And so thank you for knocking those out. There were quite a few. I really do appreciate it for everybody.
And how long is the survey being open, Jordan? How long? Is it open?
Right now I have it set to be open through Friday. And we're going to keep an eye on it. That's mostly for people that need to watch the video back. And we'll keep an eye on how the views go. If we need to work on keeping it open longer because we see a high count, we'll do that. But right now, just through Friday.
That's helpful.
Okay. I want to check if there are any senators in the room that have any questions on the presentation. Okay.
I have one. I know it was somewhat addressed in the conversation, but is there any place in the equation in terms of years of service? I've gotten a lot of staff members asking about that in terms of compensation study, and I know that goes back to the whole compression issue. But is there, moving forward, anything in place or will be in place to address that?
You need me to repeat that one?
Sorry.
No.
Okay.
I think I got it. Okay. So what you are referring to is how people move throughout the bands and the structure, and we consider things like, skills, experience, education, and it could include things like time and position. Those are decisions that we still have to discuss and talk about, as a factor, but typically you can see something like time and position being a factor when we're talking about where people should be paid within their band. So just because someone is in the band, which we know, again, we focused on the people that are not within the band. But just because people are within the band doesn't necessarily mean that they're still paid appropriately, right? So, but that's based on a number of factors. And again, the things that we've got to focus on for additional phases of this. And what does that look like and where people fall based on a number of factors. But yes, we will have those discussions. It's a great question. It's a valid question. And we will be able to include those things in our pay admin guidelines as well.
Okay. Any other senators in the room? Okay. Senators on Zoom, don't want to leave you guys out. Regent Brinkley.
Sorry, I have a question. I wasn't going to ask it, but the faculty in their presentation were shown pay bands. Is there any reason the staff aren't?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, there's not a reason for the most part. We are still tweaking some of the data behind the scenes, which impacts some of that. But that will be updated, that will be released. It will absolutely be public information. Faculty were simply just a little bit further ahead than we were, and getting some of those tweaks back.
In fairness, I also heard there's 100% complete. So I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Okay, if there's nobody else, I have one. On the market assessment methodology slide, there's a footnote number 2 that noted for positions below the director level, a cost of labor differential of 90% will be applied to reflect regional labor market. So this is more just me not knowing what that means. I think it's in reference to the 2.8% aging factor, but kind of what, if you can help me understand what the differential, 90% differential is.
Yep. So it's actually not related to the 2.8%. It's related to the overall market.
Okay.
But from a standpoint of how we evaluate talent markets, we specifically look at, are you recruiting on a national basis, or are you very focused on your recruiting markets for losing and getting talent? It goes both ways. Are they more local or regional? For some positions, generally those below a director level on the staff side, the regional market is the biggest factor in driving a lot of the competitive market salaries. And so to do that, we look at a cost of labor analysis from the ERI database, is a main database that most firms use, that allows us to look at cost of labor, so the cost to hire or the cost of salaries at different salary levels within very specific geographic regions. And so in doing that and comparing the Bowling Green area and the region overall to the national market, we generally see that salaries are about 10% lower within the region for those types of positions. And so that's where that is applied, is to be more reflective of the local labor market.
Thank you, Katie. That answers that question. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
All right. If there's no more questions, we'll thank you all very much for coming and visiting with us virtually today. And again, thank you for answering all the questions that have come in. And thank you in advance for, I'm sure there'll be a few for people that couldn't make our meeting. So thanks for keeping an eye on those. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you all very much. We will be in touch and more to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to our next item, which are our reports. Regent Brinkley, if you have a report.
I do. It's pretty thin, but I have one. Our committee meetings are on Friday of this week, and those are the what we would call the quarterly committee meetings that precede the board meetings, right? So we meet as committees individually. I'm on the finance and budget and student affairs committees. So if there are action items on academic affairs or executive, I don't have a vote in that meeting setting. We have 2 action items in academic affairs. I mean, these are not really anything that stands out. Supply chain management graduate certificate approval, some emeritus appointments. We'll have a department name change proposal as an information item, not an action item. The Finance and Budget Committee, we will do a small list of personnel actions. And then Susan will have, which I met with her and her team on this yesterday, a budget versus actual report. Shane, the faculty regent and I, Shane Spiller, met with their team yesterday for a little over half an hour. And every explanation that we got for any significant noted variances, they seemed logical. Those were legitimate explanations. I didn't see anything that really stood out or freaked me out to the point that I feel like this group should really be red flagged. The executive committee has one action, they have two action items and one information item. Julia, in my report to you, I misstated and said they had one action item. One of those moved from the Academic Affairs Committee, which was the approval of Provost Emerita for Dr. Cheryl Stevens. It's just a number, so you can update it from 1 to 2. And then there's approval of construction of new facilities for athletics, softball, and soccer programs. Again, I'm not on the executive committee, so I won't be voting on that. But if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address those with the committee and the board prior to the meeting, or anyone else. And that includes Todd Stewart if we need to. There'll be an information item, which will be a legislative update from Jennifer Smith about what I'm assuming will primarily have to do with the upcoming changes in budget allocations. And then there'll be 2 information items on the Student Affairs Committee, which are updates on recruitment and retention from Dr. Logan. And there'll be a little theatrical presentation from the fine cast members of Little Women. That's really it on the committee meeting side. If you all have any questions for me prior to that, it's Friday morning. Please feel free to send them to either my direct email address on campus or WKU Staff Region at gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer or address anything that I can. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Senator Cato, please, you come here.
Hi. The Staff Senate Book Scholarship is open to all WKU employees, both part-time and full-time. The summer semester deadline is May 5th. We partner with Barnes & Noble to give 2 $100 book scholarships for classroom supplies and books. So please apply online at wku.edu/staffsenate/scholarship. You can also make a donation to the scholarship at wku.edu/make-a-gift.
Senator England.
Good morning, Senator Cato and I coordinated on colors. So for the treasurer's report, as of March 31st, the ENG index had a starting balance of $3,024.98 and total disbursements of $98.12. Part of that was for food passes for Airmark with our mentor mentee program, and then another portion of that was to Amazon for picture credits for our Christopher Ware Staff Star Awards. So the ending balance of that account was $2,926.86. The WKU Foundation account had a starting balance of $1,525.57, additions of $30.85, with an ending balance of $1,556.42. The College Heights Foundation account had a starting balance of $1,491.20, additions of $14.60, with an ending balance of $1,505.80. I have no update from the Budget and Finance Committee for this time. The only thing I would say with regards to Employee Benefits Committee, our March meeting did not make because we had no new items of business, but our next scheduled meeting is April the 21st, and I expect that we will have quite a bit of business in that one. So more to come in May.
Thank you. Senator Hagenberg, you have no, okay. And then Anthony already talked, the technology officer doesn't have a report. Julia, do you have a report? Okay. And then Tanya is out of town today. Senator Smith, no, okay. And myself, I do. Julia, I emailed this to you, so hopefully that makes your life a little easier. So the last month and change was packed with committee meetings, presentations, conversations, and a few more meetings. It still was a productive 6 weeks. A little hard to believe it was 6 weeks since we were together last, but it was. I hope everybody had a nice spring break. Got to enjoy those with your families. And thanks to the Senate for pushing that back to help people balance things out a little easier. Two opportunities of the month that were the most rewarding for me were the chance to celebrate the 2021-22 Staff Leadership Institute cohort and their completion of the program and ceremony on March 30th. I'll add an extra congratulations to Devin Bell, Autumn Coleman, Beth Gafford, Erica Gunn, Lindsey Jones, our very own Senator Stephanie Pritchard, Emily Renfro, Allison Salmon, Abigail Schroeder, Julie Scott, Kyler Shaw, and Nicola Sparks. Thank you to the WKU Human Resources for being such a great partner in sponsoring the program, and to the continuing and professional development staff, and especially April McCauley for efforts in coordinating the program. The other was serving on a selection committee for the Staff Excellence Awards. While it's no easy task to narrow down the nominees to one recipient in each category, reading through narratives of staff who repeatedly go above and beyond the call of service, amplifying the WKU spirit, and making a real impact in the areas they serve was rewarding for me. The recipients of those awards were honored last night at a reception at the President's home. The Customer Service Award recipient was Robin Lovell. Teamwork Award was given to Dana Devine. Student Support Award to Lamario Moore. Inclusion Award, Laura Smith. Unsung Hero Award, Jessica Steenbergen. And WKU Affiliate Award went to Sherry. So Rank Budget Executive Committee meetings. We wrapped up committee work for the semester with the last meeting this past week. Primary focus of the last meeting was a presentation on the compensation study. I'll note that a question was raised, I think, during an early March executive committee meeting about what planning was going on related to staffing offices during commencement and recognition ceremonies. A detailed answer was released on Monday of this week in an email by President Caboni. If you maybe were like me and read the first part of the email about the Commons and then immediately went to see what restaurants were in, you may have missed the announcement about staffing goals on Thursday and Friday of finals week. But it said if you don't plan on attending commencement on Thursday, you're encouraged to conclude your workday early and leave campus by 3:30 p.m. And on Friday, May 6th, the president asked all supervisors to implement flexible working arrangements to every extent that's possible, allow offices to remain open, but minimal staff on campus, and the majority working remotely. That's a conclusion of my report. I just went ahead and read it all since I wrote it. So, but we'll move on to any old business. Okay. Any new business? Okay, we reserve time for public comment. So if there's anyone that would like the floor to make public comment, whether senator or not. Okay, move on to announcements. Do any senators have announcements that need to be made? So the first note I have, the election committee met a couple weeks ago, narrowed down the schedule. There'll be a very detailed release on information related to the Staff Senate elections, but some highlights are that nominations will open on April 22nd. The deadline for nominations will be May 6th at 4:30 p.m. We just have to set a deadline, so we picked into the day on that Friday. And then the election day will be May 19th, and it'll be held via TopNet. So I'll say this about the running for the Senate. If you want to be involved, it's a great way to get involved. You get to choose the level at which you're engaged, and for myself, it's the only way I can think about it. The more you put in, the more you get out. It's one of those situations. It's really rewarding. So if you have watched or participated in a couple of these meetings, whether you were on YouTube or in the room, and you liked something you saw or heard, or didn't like something you saw and heard, you can come and either be a part of more of the same or help make a difference to change. And that's just the challenge, that you can make it better either way. Again, there'll be more information and details about that come out on April 22nd. Our next Staff Senate Executive Committee meeting is April 27th. That'll be via Zoom. And our next Senate meeting is May 4th. We'll be back in DSU 2081 and on YouTube again. And that's all the content I have for today. Okay, so we are now adjourned.
Just say, I got kicked off.